I think you will all agree that this was quite an amazing sight to see this rocket going up. This weekend, the world's largest, biggest and more powerful rocket took its second flight test in front of a very large audience, whether it was physically in Boca Chica surroundings in South Texas, or online or even on the television. The anticipation was high, and boy, SpaceX has not disappointed us. SpaceX has launched for the second time its two-stage rocket, the Starship rocket number 25, on top of a super heavy booster number 9, into orbit on the 18th of November 2023, 7 months after his first attempt with Starship number 24 and booster number 7. Now, both Starship and Super Heavy boosters are 5,000 metric tons or 11,000 million pounds and 122 meter or 400 feet tall. It's 9 meter or 30 feet wide. It requires 4,500 metric tons or 10,000 million pounds of liquid propellant, being methane and oxygen, to transport 150 million tons to low Earth orbit. Now, his boosters have 33 Sea Raptor engine, whilst his Starship has 3 sea-level Raptor engines and 3 vacuum-optimized Raptor engines. Each Raptor engines bear 2.3 meganewton or 520,000 pound force thrusts, meaning that at takeoff it has 76 meganewton or 16.7 million pound force of thrust, giving a thrust to weight ratio of just below 1.5, a colossal achievement in rocketry. Starship and Super Heavy is 10 meter taller and 2.5 times more powerful than Saturn V, but also 58 meter taller and 1.1 times more powerful than SLS Artemis rocket. Now, in Europe, Starship and Super Heavy is 90 meter taller and 2.7 times more powerful than Ariane 5 rocket. Now, why is the Starship / Super Heavy booster bigger and more powerful than most rockets? Well, that's because it's entirely reusable, and that comes at a price where more power and fuel and therefore size is required. So the plan for SpaceX was to get the Starship going into suborbital altitude for nearly the entire Earth's rotation, all the way from Boca Chica in South Texas to Hawaii. Okay, so that is the flight path planned, but today you will see it's not exactly what happened. Well, this Starship number 25 took off in Boca Chica, and with a massive plume of dust and gas, and with quite an amazing sight, as you would have seen. Again, the trajectory was immediately bent a little bit away from the stage 0, the orbital launch mount, I assume to protect it. And you could hear this amazing roar, which I will show you again later on in the video, quite indicative of such a massive rocket. You would have never seen this anywhere else. You're looking at right now at the second flight tests of the Starship rocket reaching suborbital altitude at 150 km. Why 150 km and not higher? Well, it's assumed to avoid other vehicles in orbital altitude, which usually starts from 160 km high. The Starship reached a velocity of 24,100 km an hour at its suborbital trajectory. Let's compare the integrated flight test number 2 to that of number 1 back in April 2023. So what did SpaceX fix? Well, they fixed the supply to booster engine, where you can clearly see that all 33 engines are working on IF2 integrated flight tests number 2, a massive progress, which is why you can now see the world's largest Mach diamond underneath the booster, this sort of triangle shape that is happening just beneath the booster, indicative of a perfect spread of thrust throughout the 33 engines. Now comparing the orbital launch mount, you can see on the left hand side quite a neat aspect compared to the right hand side. Even the plates on the right hand side were really damaged. Even the cameras and the cars were completely damaged, whilst on the left hand side they weren't. So what went right is the new deluge system to avoid this crater. You can see on the left there's a massive amount of water going out like a shower head upside down, and on the right hand side the quick disconnect for the ship, which happened to have been damaged just during the ship's taking off. Let's study the ascent speed and altitude. So on EFT2, the rocket speed was twice as fast and went twice as high at about 70 km altitude compared to IFT1. I've already mentioned the number of engines who didn't work on IFT1. But now if you study also the consumption of liquid oxygen and methane, you would see that the usage or the consumption was well balanced on IFT2 compared to IFT1. Unfortunately, we also know that the IFT1 Starship and booster went in a loop whilst before being destroyed, whilst the booster managed to separate from the Starship number 25 during IFT2, unfortunately shortly after they had to destroy the ship. Now, in IFT1, Starship was destroyed long ago, whilst in IFT2, Starship, this time number 25, still carries on all the way up to suborbital altitude, the 148 km. Let's talk about IFT2 shortfalls. So it started very well with the liftoff of IFT2, followed by Max Q, then booster MECO, here standing for most engines cutoff, followed by the hot staging, where we saw the Starship Raptor ignition and stage separation. And then we also saw the booster boost back burn startup, also went pretty well. Unfortunately, this is where things started to go sour, where the booster backburn shutdown didn't happen, and followed by the booster transonic speed, then the booster landing burn startup, and the booster landing burn shutdown. Of course, followed by the Starship engine cutoff, Starship re-entry. All this didn't happen. Now, what you're looking at now is basically the stages of the Starship process, where the booster ended up near the Virgin Islands, as you can see on the bottom right, and followed quickly by the Starship. So all that were basically exploded in midair in order to avoid issues with population. Now, it is interesting to see that here the Starship reached 24,000 km per hour at an altitude of 148, to be precise, and right by the Virgin Island. Now, if we calculate the orbital velocity at an altitude of 148 or 150 km, we would calculate a velocity of 28,000 km per hour. Now, as you know, the Starship at that altitude was running out of fuel and only reached 24,000 km an hour. So it was quite short of altitude, and that 28,000 km is actually the minimum speed at which the vehicle can remain on orbit. So what it meant was the vehicle was 4,000 km an hour short of speed to remain in this orbit, running out of fuel, hence why the automated flight termination system had to trigger, because this ship, this Starship number 25, was becoming a hazard and perhaps going down in altitude and maybe uncontrollable at the end, hence why it was terminated in altitude. Let's talk about achievements that SpaceX carried out during this IFT number 2 versus what was planned, or even versus IFT number 1. So first of all, SpaceX has been quite vocal, thanking the team and reminding them that success really is measured by the amount of learning they do, and that's exactly what they have been doing. So first achievement, that very little pad damage was noticeable and mostly everything was reusable according to SpaceX. The surrounding areas were really unaffected, and that was going to be good for the Fish and Wildlife Service. Number 3, that all engines worked. The 33 engines of the first stage have been working quite reliably all the way up to the flip. Then the most engine cutoff was achieved at the expected altitude compared to IFT1, and that was an achievement. Hot staging as well, a very first for SpaceX, has been also achieved. It's quite an amazing sight, and booster separation shortly after that. Unfortunately, after this, the booster exploded, but nevertheless, Starship went on and reached a velocity of 24,000 km an hour, short from the orbital speed expected, and an altitude of 148, which was just below the 160 of orbital altitude. And the excitement was definitely guaranteed. Thank you very much, SpaceX, for that piece of work. My name is Christophe Paget. Thank you for watching this special edition of Espace News. I will leave you with the sound of Booster 9 taking off from Boca Chica this November. See you next week.